All right. Welcome to the Realm of Ideas is for all. I'm Bruce Gemmel, and you
I'm
are,
Julie Rower. Yes.
and this is there it is right there.
Yeah.
And this is the Realm of Ideas is free to all. This is our preview for episode 71, Imitators. And we're going to basically take, I think, a somewhat Darwinian approach to kind of fleshing these out, one in a kind of social sense of what I think happens in terms of the artificial sense. And I think Julie will kind of talk about that in nature. And I think one of the things that I guess would we reflect on, not the fact that it's just the pejorative sense of the word in the artificial sense, is how poorly it is operated in the artificial sense in terms of the significance that it has in the natural sense. So, who are the imitators? As we know them, they're usually those people who are kind of trying to piggyback off that of someone else. Those people who kind of like try to either usually at least a copyist in my understanding is someone who kind of understands the dependence of the thing from which they're working and usually recognizes it as a tool of study. However, the imitator sometimes will be much more um, deceptive and kind of divisive in terms of the fact they will never really kind of refer to that which is their model from which they're working, and sometimes even try to kind of take credit for it. I think that's the piece that for me is the most despicable. Anyway, so with that said, I'm sure Julie is going to be much more in case of like, because you love the kind of, in fact, it was part of your last piece where you had the, was it the purple sea slug?
It's actually a Carpathian blue
Carpathian blue
slug.
slug, yes.
Yes. So
Exactly.
say about my slug.
Yeah, but it was like it was something where we talk in nature many times we'll kind of notice these things where a circumstance is such that you will be able to kind of understand the value of appearing to be something that you're not. And in fact, whereas uh, they both are deceiving to the eye, one in terms of like wanting to be something that you desire to be, and in a natural sense, kind of throwing someone off the path by not revealing yourself and kind of masquerading as something else as well, but not to reveal yourself. And in the case of the imitator, it's usually to reveal yourself as something false. So in a way, it's similar,
Mm-hmm.
but in fact, usually it's kind of for survival. Anyway, so tell us.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I will point out that the imitator is in nature, in the natural world, in science, is vastly different to my way of thinking than a human copyist or plagiarist. The human copyist or plagiarist is almost always operating from a weakness or multiple weak points. They are not intelligent enough, they're not imaginative enough, inventive enough to create, write, paint, draw, invent something on their own. Therefore, they copy and plagiarize the works of those individuals in the human race that are far more inventive than they are. That's a beautiful card.
It is.
Yeah. And it's very different in the natural world. Very often, those animals, plants, and processes that are the imitators are usually quite ingenious, and they are not necessarily, in fact, are actually not operating from a point of frailty. They are not weaker, they're actually more clever, they're more inventive, they're more adaptive, they're actually quite ingenious. A great example is the cuttlefish.
Hmm.
So the alpha males of the cuttlefish, the bigger, larger cuttlefish, are almost always chosen by the females as their preference to mate and pass on their what is seen as and probably is their superior genetic information, being the dominant males. But the beta males, actually, the beta male cuttlefish are never able or were were not, past tense, able to get near the female cuttlefish in their smaller role. They were substantially smaller, less imposing, and they were literally kept away. So they were not able to pass on their genetic information when they did something incredibly. Are you familiar with this? You'll love this. The great imitation is they became female cuttlefish, not in actuality, but in their coloration, their behavior. As you know, cuttlefish can alter not just their skin color, but their skin texture and their morphology, meaning they will often cluster their tentacles and make different shaped mouths, different shaped heads. They will pose as octopuses. I mean, they can actually pose.
So they actually
pose as female cuttlefish,
like transvestites.
Yes,
but did the males try to mate with them?
Well, they would try, but they only do it long enough to be part of the harem with the female, the actual female cuttlefish, meaning it gets them close enough so they can slip in.
So what happens is, so they get the see. So they kind of like get invited to the party as one of the gals.
Yes,
and then like, I think I remember.
It's just a brilliant.
That's a brilliant idea.
Now, see, that is not a spring allergy.
So they're not trying to be females. They're just basically kind of going as transvestites.
It's a ruse.
It's a ruse.
It's a ruse to get to mate with the actual female.
That's interesting. So it's basically just a way to sneak into the boudoir.
Right, under the cover of the giant alpha males.
Well, in a way, we've talked often about the fact that like the males, the non-alpha males, which is like, I think, most of the men who live in New York. So sorry, Pete. Most of the men who live in New York City and kind of surrounding areas. But as a result, no, it's true. I mean, I think the men live in the inner country, and the kind of the alpha males live in the inner country, and the beta or whatever kind of live on the coast. But
theta.
Yeah, if you've ever
beta.
You've been to Brooklyn, you kind of know what I mean.
Yeah, Theta land.
Yeah. Anyway, I think what's interesting is that we've always looked at the ways in which the kind of like less successful males will do things. It's kind of like, in fact, one of the things we found was really funny was, the guy who pretended to be sensitive by going to women's rallies.
Yes,
he actually
it's
had absolutely no interest in the. In fact, I remember telling us to one of our female friends, and they're like, "Men would do that? That's horrible." It's like,
men do that.
Of course they do. That's how they pretend to be sensitive, and sensitive women are stupid enough to fall for it. Anyway, so it does exist in the human world as well. But the kind of the weasel, the jackal, the kind of like, the scavenger types that cannot actually conquer females themselves, find other ways to do that.
But actually, here's where it's rampant.
Say.
The plant world. Oh, yeah. I mean, we actually...
As opposed to the art world.
Yeah. We actually spoke about the chameleon vine in a previous show, so I would urge you
you talked about it, and eloquently, I must say.
Thank you.
Of course.
A quick recap, because it's incredibly appropriate here, is the chameleon vine, which is native to South and Central America, if I recall. It is an imitator of incredible skill. So it doesn't just imitate the host tree. It actually has very little structure of its own. So in fact, this imitator finds architecture that supports it, meaning it really has very little structure. So it finds a protective architecture, a structural scaffolding, if you actually will, which it doesn't have. It's a very it's a tender little tiny bendy vine. So it basically attaches to a host plant, usually a tree, but there are literally several dozen host plants it can imitate, but it doesn't just imitate one at a time. This is a skill. If people could do this and master this skill, they would be quite unstoppable. It is the Zelig of plants, but not in different movie scenes all at once. So different parts of one chameleon vine, depending on their location, on their host, will take on the characteristics of that host or any other plants in the vicinity. They can even imitate plastic plants.
Great.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so that's what we'll be talking about on Sunday. So that's episode 71, Imitators. So the realm of ideas is free to all, and it's to the benefit of all for us to keep it that way.
Authenticity.